Still in regards to what we're talking about is speech being a new fourth S and the older triumvirate of one mapping we've been using of the primary activities of man being sex, sustenance, and shelter. And speech now being, in its own quite valid, quite operational way, now being a primary affair, and how talk makes any of the older three S's appear to be. Makes them seem to be more than they are, more than they were. If you recall, and we were even using romance last time. But in all areas, I just picked out romance for who knows what reason. But in that same way, you should see speech has made eating into dining. In the same way that it would turn, from one view, turn sex into romance. And in case you think I can't make it fly to the third one, in the matter of shelter, of course, some of you need to be, if there's such a thing as an urban, how would you be down home urbanized? In the third S, talk has made residing, you know what that is. People say, well, I reside or I live over in the Rockefeller condos, as opposed to what used to be kind of more primeval urban description that people would say, I stay in the fourth ward. I was afraid some of you weren't, not some of you, all of you. At any rate, there is a version, but we're not going to stay there. Talk makes any of the three S's. When you add talk to it, it fleshes out in a way, not in some untoward way, not in any way that's open to any criticism. It is in a necessary way. The talk does not, in a sense, since it was not one of the original three S's, it is not with the same kind of somatic or physiological or evolutionary underpinnings that it has to rest on one of the three S's. But it does not simply stand on it. It does not simply override it in some sort of childish description of how civilization might work, that it's part of the human mind's job to try and curb those crude animalistic appetites, which it is part of its job, but that's not much of a usable description nowadays. It adds to it. It puts on necessary weight and height. Simply for the reason, back to one of the last things we were mentioning last time you and I were meeting, as wonderful as sex might be, it is no longer sufficient. And it's not right or wrong. Well, to a revolutionist mind, it is wrong to think that it is possible, because you're dreaming that you can back up without hurting your tires and find Henri Rousseau or somebody there, and all of you be noble savages, and we'll all just get together. Not necessarily you and Rousseau, but you and him get together and go pick up women, and all we'll do is engage in, sex. And boy, we won't ever tell those women we love them. We won't have to put up with that. We'll engage in sex the way God intended people to in Alabama and Mississippi and other righteous places. It is no longer sufficient, literally. You cannot do it. You cannot do it any more on a wider scale than you could back up humanity and now live without speech. I'll do it one more time because I know it's a little subtle. For us to try and say that speech is now a primary activity, absolutely primary and basic, we could get ordinary intelligence. I'll be ordinary intelligence. Absolutely no difficult imitating it, especially the look. I just realized it doesn't take any kind of attempted theatrics. Okay. Ordinary intelligence could say, all right, that's not very thought-provoking, that's not very incisive, because anybody could say, well, we couldn't get along with that speech now because, I'm talking for ordinary intelligence, they could say, well, you just couldn't operate. Business wouldn't operate. What does that prove? It is not that some particular function, no matter how large might be the function, such as the world of commerce, let's say, it's not that simply that would break down, and it's not simply that all of civilization would break down. It's that you can't do it. There's no way to return to a noble past. There is no noble past. There's no way to return to a quieter time. There's no way to go back to some time when man was, I like this one, more in touch with himself. I didn't know does that mean ball players, I'm sorry, I was kind of crude. If it didn't show up on camera, I was saying, I guess today are more intellectual. Instead of grabbing your crotch, a neural ball player, you'd go. I just wanted to. There's no way to describe this. I'm just going to leave it. But do understand, it's not a particular view from me or anybody. And ordinary people could hear this and say, well, yeah, I know what you're saying. We could almost literally not get along with that speech. And then if you push them a little bit, they'd say, all right, modern civilization, all right, I'll admit literally, could not get along with that speech. But then the wiring apparatus of ordinary intelligence, the tacit part, they would still be saying, and they can't help it, is they would still be saying, and they would very likely not verbally enumerate this, but what they were saying is that literally we could do that speech. Just taking away speech wouldn't kill us. We might go back to being barbarians. But we could live with that speech. And the fact is, it cannot be proven, of course, why it's interesting. We could not, because you cannot back up. And a finite reality is, for those of you that ever, it's why they mathematically keep getting close, and it's not a problem that they're going to solve, but even in the world of science, they keep trying to figure out why, under certain conditions, apparently time is reversible. That you can look at certain mechanical phenomenon, and from certain theoretical, well, even you can almost play with it view, that mechanical events you can't really tell unless you were there in the beginning whether they're going forward or backwards. You can't tell in what position the heavens are unless you had some focal point established to start with in a temporal frame that you knew what was going on. And so they keep wondering. I don't know how often they wonder, but every now and then a physicist or somebody wonders and writes a little article about why in the world can't time run backwards. It's not that time can't run backwards, it's that a finite reality, in our case, here on this planet, a 3D reality, it cannot run backwards because there's nowhere to go. If it ran backwards, it would be suicidal. Any of you physicists that might be hearing this, if you really want to play with it, that all right, let's say it could run backwards. You wouldn't know it because as soon as it ran backwards, I think in the world of particle physics, it's known as, what do they call it? Buying the farm? Whoppo time. Zing. That's the end of it. There is no way specifically to speak of going backwards. There is nothing going on in human life that can be reversed. And still part of the level of humanity's intelligence, they're made to continue, as you know, criticize and to find fault and to say, we would be better off without this. You cannot back it up, though. You cannot selectively back up. Those things that life doesn't need, people, again, are not wired up to notice it. They seem to, what do they call it in chemistry? Or is it accounting? They seem to disappear. But you cannot back up reality where we were, if you'll follow. And it's not anything specific. It is not to say, although it's true, but it's not to say and leave it there that, well, wait a minute. Speech is important because without speech we could not have blank. We could not have commerce. We could not have banking. We could not have politics. We could not have romance. We could not have family life. Yes, 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 yes. But even the whole, if you named every possible human activity, that still doesn't cover it. Because you would still think, if you're ordinary, well, all we're saying is everything as we know it now, all the manifestations of civilized life would collapse. No, no, no. Life would collapse because you cannot back it up. It is not a matter of parts. It is not a matter of facets of life that are so hinged on talk. Hey, tell me something new. That certain aspects are so hinged on life. I'll do it again. Tell me something new. It's not that some aspect, some one particular facet is so hinged on life that could not be undone. If you backed up, you're not simply going to, under those conditions, do possible severe damage to your rear tires. You're going to blow out all the tires, your car is going to explode, and you're going to go live with Elvis. That is, if you were alive. It cannot be backed up. In light of all that, now, as always, we're back up to speed. Now, in light of all that, I was going to say that we could add a new key to a kind of revolutionist exploratory map, and perhaps even use, how about Wild West symbolism? I mean, I know how intriguing that is to many people. I mean, Buddha, just before he left, I understand, was working on his own version. And it was either Buddha or Goethe, I can't remember. But we could add a kind of, in light of all this, as I'm saying, a kind of new, an additional key to this kind of mapping, and even detail a new, don't tell me not another one, yes, another one, a new detailing of, the three classes of man. I knew it. Man, colon, or parentheses, man, colon, man, about to give me another definition, in this case, of man being the modern, good citizen of the verbal city. That kind of man. Now, under those details, to call three new classifications, the collective, the strays, and the pioneers. How about that? The collectives, the town folk, the herd, none with any pejorative connotation to it, but the collective are those people inseparably now tied to the fourth S. The town folk, in a sense, support us all. Without the town folk, it's all gone. There is no infrastructure to civilization. The town folk are the squares, the middle class, the bourgeoisie, the hoi polloi. They're it. They're the somatic heart, guts of life. And they are, and you don't have to stay with just some sociological picture I pulled out like middle class. They are those inseparably tied now to the fourth S, which all I'm saying is the heart of life itself, that it cannot live. It's not a question. It's not a speculation. It could not exist without speech. So that's what the collective, that's what the town folk are. The strays, I only bring them in because they do exist, and surely by now none of you are that tied up with them, but the strays are like the outdated, out-of-sync anomalies of a more silent past. The strays in life, they are necessary. It's not here nor there, but the strays are simply those on the fringes of society, is those within life's body playing a particular role in the tug-of-war of let's go this way, let's dance forward. No, it's using ordinary terminology, it is those who are mentally out of the mainstream. They are behaviorally out of the mainstream. Crooks, nuts, insurance salesmen. I'm sorry. It's the fringes. And what it amounts to, regardless of any political or sociological viewpoint that the collective, that is the town folk, have of them, that, they're criminals, or they don't take things serious enough, or they wander around talking to themselves and relieving themselves on our city streets and other horrible things. They're outcasts. They're not part of us. That's true. But what the real description, in light of the maps we're using now, that's why I said it was a temporary new kind of key we could add, is they are actually outdated at any given time. Whether we're talking about now or if we jump back into pre-Christian times in Rome or in Athens, and there would be somebody there that would be the fringes. History, recounts them. They're always hanging around there. They were then outdated for that time. They are outdated for this time. And it's not a matter of that they're psychologically out of step with everyone else, or that their criminal behavior belies any understanding of where the social mores of that time is going, although that's about the best description they could give in the city. I'm telling you what it is. They are out of sync to verbal life. Wherever the stage of verbal life is at that time, whether it would be 500 BC, 50 BC, 1500 AD, or today, they are outdated for that time. That is why they are out of step. Not right or wrong. The city decides it's right or wrong because the collective finds anything that pushes against it to be. The main divisions nowadays are it's either intellectually ill-based or it's just ill-based behavior. In other words, you're either criminal or you're mentally out of step. But what it amounts to is that you are out of sync with verbal life at that time. You are an anomaly if you're astray. I keep saying you. You know I'm using that generically. I'm not looking at you. No, I'm not looking at you, no. You are an out-of-sync anomaly. You are from an older, more silent time. The third class, we could call the, what do I call them? The neurally, we could call them the pioneers. Let's stick with the Wild West symbolism for a while. Remember the town folk, the collective, then the strays, then the pioneers are the neurally homeless, are the neurally unsettled, as opposed to the town folks who were set to lores. Or even, how about a neural gunslinger? And how about this? Have we about worn out the Wild West picturization? I don't know. I'm somewhat staggered, Roy. I forgot to do Gabby Hayes. Now, of course, I'm referring to people attempting to do this kind of stuff. Now, somebody who would be a truly, almost neurally homeless, kind of a pioneer. And I do not use that to, on the other side of my subnote of referring such as to the collective of saying that there was no negative connotation. To say it's pioneer is no particular non-humble connotation to doing this. It's just that you are not in the city. You are not part of the collective herd. But you are not yet, I don't mean yet temporally, you are not, in spite of that, one of the strays. Because one of the strays, you're simply out of date, out of sync. And you don't know it. You can't help it. And you're a part of the past. And a neurorevolutionist, or the neurally unsettled, you're not part of the past. And you're not out of step. You're out of sync. But not where it shows. Because if it shows, you're hanging around with the strays anyway. You got to be able to pass for being normal. So the neurally homeless, I was going to give you a description. Would be those who are, without any doubt, amidst the joyous world of speech. And at the same time, they have no expressed or identifiable address. We are talking in here, we're not talking about somebody on the street corner saying, I'm neurally homeless. I'm not part of the crowd. I go my own way. I blaze my own intellectual trails intellectually. That, must I point you, puts you in the fine companionship of the strays. Because you are not what you say you are. Because if you say you're that, you're part of the strays. Or you could be part of the collective and just drunk. But if you stand out amongst either the town folk or the strays and holler, I'm not part of you people, then you are. There's not many guarantees in life, but those of you who can hear through good housekeeping ears, there is one. If you tell the strays or the town folk, no offense, people, but I'm not part of you. Right. Speaking regarding the collective, this may seem to be a side trip, and what the hell? The people hollered back, we don't know. Remember? Then why are you staying here listening to me? All right. Regarding the collective, the town folk, and regarding speech, we're in the midst of something that has moved so fast, and it's already up to such an edge of city life that it's almost Those of you who remember your Scottish history, I do. It's almost up beyond the pale. Well, that's right. They brought that to Wild West. I heard that in a movie one time. Somebody even pulled that out and said, "Draw the line of the pale." But I don't know. It just seems strange. I can't picture many Western cowboy movies where they were wearing kilts. But at any rate, don't any Scottish historians write me, please. At any rate, this is already right up to the edge that it's really not going to go much further. It can't. People won't hear it. They just lose interest. But let me put it on you right quick, because it is just one of those little things that life sort of lets happen every now and then. In the collective world, based upon speech, based upon what I've been describing to you of the three primaries now becoming fleshed out, becoming unavoidably fed and nourished by speech, such as that eating is no longer sufficient, you must dine, at least in part, and sex is no longer sufficient as is, it must be now, at least in part, romance. Along those lines, see if you can catch this, there has become, in the collective reality of the town folks, a new defense to untoward behavior. It started off, I guess the best known in the ordinary world was known, as a matter of fact, from the great area of the Wild West, known as the Bay, was known as the Twinkie defense. That is, it became a defense that I am addicted to food. That they even, attorneys out there and down there got to fly for a while, was that, this is not the point, but since I said it and so many of you look blank, was a man killed somebody, and the defense was that he was addicted to sugar, to junk food, and the sugar has a certain chemical effect on some people's hormonal system, his chemical balance, and it kind of drove him, at least partially, bonkers. It was known as the Twinkie defense. If you have not heard about that, which I didn't make that up, believe it or not. Really? Yeah. It's one of the great things of being here is I don't really have to make up any of this stuff. I just have to drag it out of the shadows to where you can see it. But at any rate, you don't have to take it that far if you can see that too much. Let's put it another way. How about people nowadays go to the weight loss clinics or turn on Oprah or Donahue or any show? It is now an accepted fact. When I say a defense, I don't mean just legal in the judicial system, but it is a defense. People now say that they are addicted to food. Now, that's been going on several years. I didn't just discover that. It's been going on, that they actually say that. Now, in the last, 2 years, I assume all of you are as hip via TV as I am, there's now known as sex addiction. People come right on and stare in the camera, put on a suit and tie, and, Geraldo or somebody will say, "We have now a panel of guest people," and they'll give their name, where they live, and they'll say, and they're addicted to sex. And people go, "Yes, what a horrible..." Before we lose our place, this is really very subtle. The point is not to bring this up for a joke, and there's nothing wrong going on. But again, if we took a kind of stray position, that part of life's body that's always being critical of how things are moving, and whether it survives for any length of time or not is not the point. Because I said, the way it's headed, it's already to the point that humanity is going to begin to lose interest because the mind cannot follow it much farther. It doesn't need to. But you could, if you were part of quite ordinary, sophisticated, critical aspect of humanity, you could laugh at that. Well, come to think about it, some of you did. I knew I'd heard that somewhere. You could really go, boy, talk about dumbass. People are going to say that they're addicted to food. You could say, it's just people who overeat. People with no willpower. That's all it is. Because I bypass the more obvious ones because they're almost outdated now to say, well, even in your lifetime, most of you, if you didn't realize it, maybe you grew up in too much of an urban area, your parents, or at least your grandparents, can remember if somebody was a drunk, everybody in town said the son of a bitch was a drunk. And if somebody said, well, why is he a drunk? They wouldn't know how to answer that. But nowadays, and I just bypassed all that, people are not a drunk anymore. Alcohol is a disease. And people speak of it as an entity, as a product. Yes, alcohol ruined my life. As though a man was just minding his own business, or cocaine, that a man was just minding his own business, and one day, maybe one night, or he was asleep, or he was real tired, and the spirit of Jack Daniels, a bottle of George Dickel, came up and just leaped up like some kind of science fiction monster and attached itself to his lips and forced him to drink. And he hated it. Oh, he hated it. And now, anyway, that's easy enough. But that's happened in the lifetime of some of you people that went from being a character flaw, from a weakness, from some kind of untoward activity to being an addiction, which is a product that talk has turned it. Civilization has turned what used to be called, and it's not right or wrong, it's progress. It is the flesh of an older time being expanded. It is the life being expanded of an older primary reality into a more sophisticated, into a greater, speech-based. And so it's no longer a weakness. You don't just turn to somebody and say, look at him, laying there in the gutter again. Old Fred's a damn drunk. No, no, no. Now, words make it seem to be more than it is, or more than it was. Because now, Fred's not a drunk. Fred needs help. Fred has an addiction. And so it's no longer just one cop could arrest Fred every now and then and throw him in jail. Now it takes social workers, a psychiatrist, people to deal with it because Fred is addicted to alcohol. All right, I just bypassed that. It has now gone into because the reason I bypassed it, for one reason, is from a certain fairly valid verbal view, those kind of habits, those kind of hobbies like drinking were in a wide range from a collective view were pathological to start with. In other words, they were doing damage. There's no way, you got to be an idiot if any of you think that alcohol is healthy. It may be fun, but it's not healthy. But so I was going past that because now we have gone into the area of non-pathological activities. Eating. You've got to eat. It's one of the primary activities. But then to overeat, it is no longer, it's not looked at as, well, you're just some kind of weak person. Instead of saying you're a drunkard, now just say, well, you're just an old fatty. Just because of your own weakness. No, no, no. I'm addicted to food. It is now an accepted medical, psychiatric, but it's medical now. Physiological is an accepted illness. Addiction to food. It is now accepted, is enough to me just go ahead and say it. It's an accepted, at least psychiatric diagnosis to be addicted to sex. Do you understand? We have now covered two of the basic S's of sex and sustenance that you can be addicted to such a point that they have become themselves, that which is health-giving to begin with, have now become health-threatening, that they're in danger of becoming pathogenic. It's not going to go any further because there's one S left. But I was going to point out to you there would be a kind of, and you're going to have to put this in real technicolor quotation marks, it would be a kind of breakthrough of civilization if it got to the point now that the defense of addiction, not just in a courtroom, but if it began to permeate the thinking of humanity, that we have a man who holds up a bank, steals money, and then maybe a cop gets in his way as he's leaving with his money, and he shoots him. And his defense is, now this is truly symbolic. Remember, because symbolic means what it is and something else. It's better than metaphor. But the defense, if it could go this far, the human mind's not going to take it much further. It's just useless. The defense would be, I'm addicted to living. Do I have to really flesh it in? It's not going to happen. It just wouldn't, it's just not. Just trust me. But the defense, it would be the next, what do they call it? Oh, I hate to say it. Logical step. Beyond being addicted to one S, sustenance, food. Second S, sex, would be to take the full primary activities that keep one alive. And so, well, I had to steal, I had to murder, I had to kill somebody, but I can explain it. I'm addicted to being alive. Now, I didn't have any money, so this guy I saw had some, so I shot him. That would be a kind of, serious quotation now, that'd be a kind of breakthrough that no matter what you did, the defense would be. Not just legally, remember this is symbolic, but it could happen because, as I pointed out to you, the Twinkie defense actually happened in a courtroom. But it's, of course, much more than that. As always, it was the energy behind it of life expanding to where what somebody did is no longer as it appeared to be previously. That is part of the word, that is part of the purpose of speech. as silly as it may have sounded when you first heard it, that this literally happened. That's what the newspapers picked it up, because the attorney, it literally happened in a courtroom in California, that the attorney laid upon his client's continual dependence, almost a fascination, nay, may I say, I'm not quoting him, but more or less, an addiction this man had to Twinkies that was known. He brought in people that testified there in the office that the guy would eat Twinkies for breakfast. He'd take a break and he'd eat Twinkies. He was getting acting like a damn cop, getting all that sugar in him and a little coffee on the side. And so it became known as the Twinkie defense, which is, of course, a shortcut, but notice it became part of the verbal vernacular in that area of the law. And it even got into ordinary conversations with people. As silly as it sounds from one view, but do you see that it expanded? And don't sit there and be some real dumbass critic yourself and say, well, it was silly. Forget that. It expanded the scope of life in the same way that romance, the talk, just even the soft, comforting sounds that men and women will make to each other after sex or during sex, is more than just some kind of social phenomenon. It makes the act, an older primal act, seem to be more than it is. When I say seem to be, that's not a judgment either. I'm not saying makes it seem to be and it's just a fraud or an illusion. No. But there is no profitable way to put it until you begin to see it yourself. Because from one view, you could say, well, we don't need to talk like that. You can screw and not talk. Yes, you can. You can eat and not talk. You can eat and not dine. Sure you can. But in the collective wisdom, in the collective structure of the town folk, we're talking about the collective. Overall, eating is no longer enough. Dining is now a part of it. Sex is no longer enough. Romance is part of it. The next sequence, why I was trying to get you to see, there's a reason, and works out there. I can stop here, because there is no way I'm going to try to explain this. You just either see it or you don't. The next step would have been, beyond a Twinkie defense, beyond a Casanova defense, that is, I'm addicted to food, I'm addicted to sex, the defense would be symbolically. It would be literally in a courtroom, which is just a crude reflection of the other arm of the symbolism. It would be part of the expansion of humanity verbally. The defense of whatever I did was not I'm addicted to sex, not I'm addicted to food, I'm addicted to existence. And it would fly. And of course, it's always been there, but it's never been verbalized. Because why do people kill each other? It's always over sex, food, or get out of my way. You took my territory. It's true with humans. It's true with lions, tigers. But it has never been part of the verbal vocabulary. It's never been part of the verbal landscape. But if it was going in the direction in which that kind of logical land of sequential seriousness does move, the next defense would have been, for whatever you did, that was open to any accusation, your defense would have been, humanity's, I'm addicted to existence. Which is to say, I'll do anything to live. Which is to say, it's what people's always done. Except you can't talk about it. Contraire, up until it got to that point to talk about it and say, well, all right, you caught me, I'll admit it. I killed the guy because I need some money. The town people said, no, you can't do that. He said, well, if I was about to starve to death. Well, I understand that, and maybe you should have, but that's part of verbal civilization. We're expanding, the town's growing, you should have come to us and we would have given you some charity. But they're saying you cannot do whatever it takes to stay alive. Not if you're going to talk about it. And of course, they don't catch you, you don't have to talk about it. And of course, they don't catch them, they're not civilized enough. You see? See, the merry-go-round doesn't stop just because the tape runs out. Well, au revoir.